Welcome to Saving America. This is your host, Dr. David D. Schein, and our series of interviews for Saving America establishes that the world is full of interesting people. And I think you'll agree with me that A.E. Lee, who's making her first appearance on Saving America, is one of those very interesting people. She graduated from Temple University with a degree in poli-sci and worked with the now governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro. Realizing that politics was not going to be her chosen career, she obtained a master's in education from Marymount University and a second master's in educational leadership from George Mason University. And she is presently a teacher in Northern Virginia. She's also an author with a focus on the important and timely topic of domestic violence. She has written a book about her own struggles called One of the Lucky Ones, and a related book, Always, which we will be talking about today. Amanda has been involved in supporting others facing domestic violence issues in their own lives. We welcome A.E. Lee for her first appearance on Saving America.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. As you know, we ask our guests three questions, and the first one is, tell us about this book. One of the Lucky Ones describes your own life struggles. Please share with the audience a little bit about the story that you tell in this important book.
Yeah, One of the Lucky Ones is my memoir, and it's about my escape from a domestic violence situation and the aftermath. And it was really therapeutic. That's why I started writing. I never intended to do anything with it. It was one of the many things that was suggested to me after I got out of a domestic violence marriage. And once I escaped and my focus was my children, and I put all of my eggs in that basket, I made sure that they had the therapy, I did everything. And I finally realized I needed to focus on myself. One of the things that someone suggested was, oh, why don't you write? And I have never been a writer. I love those pretty journals that you find in Barnes and Noble, and I would pick them up. I'm like, oh, these are pretty. And then they would just like sit in the corner. And one night I just started thinking about like, well, I guess I could start talking about this. And oh, maybe this chapter would be called this. And it just it was like word vomit. It just poured out of me. And I wrote it and I just put it aside. I was like, maybe I'll show my kids someday so they can truly understand, because they were really little when it happened. And then I showed it to one of my girlfriends and she's like, you need to publish this. Even if this helps just one other person hearing your story, you need to publish this. And I sat on it for a little bit longer and I was like, you know what? She's right. If I just help one other person who my story resonates with and helps them to, wake up. That's what I call it. You kind of wake up. You're in a trance a little bit when you're in a domestic violence situation. And then you wake up and you're like, oh my God, what is happening to me? Then it's worth it. So it's my memoir about how I met my ex-husband and our marriage and why I stayed, and then the after part of it, which no one really talks about, that the scariest and most dangerous time for a domestic violence victim is the aftermath, when you finally decide to leave and leave.
And why is that?
It's because the abuser has lost control. They have no control over you anymore. You've left the situation. So then they resort to other things. For mine, I was stalked, I was harassed, and I felt very little support with the criminal justice system. And please don't get me wrong, I have the utmost respect for police officers, for any type of law enforcement, for anyone in the court system. But because I had never called before, there was very little done to my ex-husband. He was basically just given a slap on the wrist. And a lot of the things he was doing, stalking, he convinced one of our neighbors at one point to gain access to their camera so he could watch me coming and going. Even that, it was considered hearsay. There wasn't enough evidence to protect me.
And which jurisdiction were you in at that time?
Fairfax County, Virginia.
Okay, because I know you've been in Pennsylvania and other locations. And what level did you reach? I mean, did you ever have him arrested?
He was arrested. There was a domestic violence kind of implosion on August 3rd, 2019 at 8:59 p.m. It will forever be ingrained in my mind. And it started out as a fight. He ended up throwing water on me, and then he threatened to burn the house down with myself and the children in it. And I grabbed my babies and we ran to my neighbor's house, who was a police officer at the time, and I called 911, and they ended up picking him up and he was arrested. And that kind of started that was, while traumatic for myself and my children, that was my open door. That was my way out. And I was able to get out, and I got a protective order, and I was somewhat protected from him. But it took a while.
It doesn't sound like the protective order protected you from stalking, because that happened after you got separated, right?
It did. And at that point, I had a permanent protective order, which is really, it's not permanent. It's only 2 years. I don't know why they call it permanent.
Mm-hmm.
And with the protective order, I mean, by the time we renewed it, when the 2 years were up, we renewed it for another year. The protective order was like 10 pages long because I kept adding things to it. Like, he can't surveil me. Well, it's in the protective order, but there wasn't concrete evidence that he was using our neighbor's camera to watch me, even though he had submitted the neighbor's camera video footage in our divorce proceedings. The police told me that wasn't enough to consider stalking.
It's so troubling, and as you know, I'm very hardcore law and order, and it seems that sometimes our legal system lets down the most needy. And speaking of the most needy, our second question is about the children.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes an ignored aspect of domestic violence is the impact on the children in these relationships. Explain to our audience how your book always can help.
Yeah, so it really came out of what I used to tell my children to comfort them. So I am an educator, and when this all happened, I was looking for a book, a picture book. My children were 3 and 5 at the time, and I wanted something that I could read to them, that they would be comforted by, that was broad enough, that wasn't like specifically what happened, but gave them comfort. And I couldn't find anything. I couldn't put my finger on exactly what it was. So this book, entitled Always, really comes out of what I used to say to my son when he would wake up in the middle of the night after this incident happened, and it was just the 3 of us in the house. And I would always say that, I promise I always will protect you, just like I did that night. And he would go, always, always. And I'm like, always, I've got you, buddy. And then reading the book to them. I mean, first of all, they think it's amazing. They think they're famous.
Well, they are. We're working on it today, aren't we?
Yeah. So reading the book to them, even now, even though they're older and they don't want to admit it, it's still comforting to them on nights that they might feel a little off.
Well, and as we mentioned, it's one of the things that sometimes we're so focused on the criminal justice system, the divorce thing, and things like that. And part of the follow up on that is, of course, is that even in a difficult divorce, the father still has access to these children under normal visitation. What's the current situation on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's taken us a long time to get where we are, but we are actually fabulous co-parents, which no one believes when I first say it. I mean, we started off with, he had no visitation whatsoever, and then we moved to supervised visitation, and then it was limited. Now we're up to almost 50. And the reason why we've been able to get there is we both have done the work that we needed to do. He took every suggestion that the court gave him on what he needed. He ended up having a diagnosis of bipolar and got on medication for that. I did everything and anything anyone suggested to help heal. We had a co-parent mediator at one point after our divorce. I mean, she was kind of awful, but it taught us how to talk to each other. And, at the end of the day, my dad's always like, I don't know how you're friendly with him. And I'm like, I'm not friends with him. But at the end of the day, I had children with him, and my kids are little. This man is not going anywhere. And Virginia is a big unification state. So I'm never going to be able to just have them all the time and protect them. And I have to learn how to work with him. And it's taken a really long time to be able to sit next to him at a sporting event and feel comfortable and not feel the fight or flight moments.
Now, the neat thing is you're also involved in other activities to help with regard to people dealing with domestic violence. Can you share a little bit more with our audience about what you're doing and different activities that people can engage in who are experiencing these issues?
Yeah, I'm involved in the court system in Fairfax County. I am one of the volunteers that escorts domestic violence victims into court and is just kind of there to hold their hand. A lot of my advocacy work has come from people who have picked up my memoir and have reached out to me directly. And it's ranges from just a quick note of, your story is the reason I left because I realized it was happening to me, to, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening to me. Like, what do I do? I need help. And I've helped several dozen women get out of situations that were similar to mine.
Well, it's a very important situation. Have you seen over the time that you've been dealing with, have you seen any improvement in the court system in terms of dealing with these issues better?
No. Unfortunately, I haven't. And, I know the court system is in place to, hear both sides and give the benefit of the doubt to a first offender, but there's got to be some wiggle room. There's got to be some reform when it comes to domestic violence. I mean, I had police officers that could attest to the assault that I had that night because throwing water on someone is considered assault. And still, my ex walked away with a slap on the wrist.
Mhm. It's still a lot of challenges ahead, I would
Mhm.
say, and all that. But hopefully, books like yours, both your books, and I know you've written some other material, will help raise the visibility, and maybe we can make some progress in the justice system. I also think that the pendulum is swinging, so to speak, where we've had a kind of a period where the focus seems to be on the aggressor and not the victim. And I'm
Mhm.
hoping that we're going to get speaking of balance, a little bit more balance. So
I hope so too. Yeah.
hopefully we'll get there. Well, how can our audience get more information about you, A.E. Lee, and your books and your other outreach activities?
Yeah, absolutely. They can go to my website, which is authораelee.com. They can also follow me on Instagram, which I'm at author AE Lee.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Amanda. This is Dr. David D. Schein for Saving America. Thanks for joining us. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favorite platform.